Customer states, buddy of mine tuned a truck for me and managed to make it 30% lighter by removing a bunch of surplus parts that I didn't need. And the owner of this car came in because his truck was still leaking oil, even after he had paid another shop $500 to sort it out. They apparently even reassured him that there was zero chance of any future oil leaks. This customer had apparently decided that their engine bay was looking a little too factory fresh, so they grabbed a can of bronze spray paint and went to town on it. The owner of this car rolled in saying, I had a tiny little drip under the car, so I fixed it myself, but I still have to top up the oil here and there, so I just want to make sure I don't need to fix it again. Customer states, my car has been a little sluggish lately, but I always change the oil on time, so I think it maybe just needs a sports air filter or something. And this customer came in saying that he needs new tires and that the mechanic maybe just have a look at the back end because his buddy said it might be a little rusty. The drive shaft on this one was holding on for dear life when the mechanic got underneath it, but then, well, he wasn't holding on at all. And this truck had apparently been used as a submarine during hurricane season. The owner of this car had been moving some furniture over the weekend and didn't want to bother with renting a van, so he just bolted a metal bed frame straight to the roof, and you can even see where the bolts came through. This customer was on her way to drop the kids off at school when the brake pedal suddenly felt like a memory foam pillow. Turns out she had some major brake issues after another shop had recently done some work on the car. The mechanic who got underneath this one found something that would have made a plumber jealous. There was enough brake line coiled up under the hood to run a small irrigation system. Customer states, yeah, she's a little rough around the edges, you know, but she drives fine. Just needs a couple new tires and she'll be as good as new. When the mechanic cracked open the engine on this one, he found a valve seat that had decided to go on a little adventure. Apparently, it made it as far as the piston before the trip ended. This customer came in saying that they had a clunking sound from the front end that had been getting worse over the past few weeks. The mechanic found the control arm looking like this. Customer states, runs great, just needs a little bit of a cleanup and some new tires. This customer had topped up some AdBlue in the driveway before heading out on a long drive to visit some family for the weekend. He made it about 40 minutes onto the highway before things got quiet. Customer states, had my car in at another shop last week and now it makes a sound like an angry cat whenever I start it up. Can you check it out? Customer states, wife backed into the garage door last Tuesday. Can you check if the antenna needs to be reattached? It might have gotten a little loose. Customer states, I was just driving along, heard a really loud crack, and now the engine sounds like a blender. Please advise. Customer states, my arms have been getting a real workout lately. Not sure if that's a car problem or if I need a gym membership. The mechanic found that someone had done a bit of carpentry work under the hood and the power steering had not taken it so well. The owner of this car was pretty sure his neighbor had done a solid job on the new suspension. Came in a few days later to have the hood checked out because it had developed what he described as a small bubble. This customer came in saying their brakes had started making a strange sound and the pedal felt a little mushy. Turns out the brake pads had just fallen out of the caliper entirely. When the mechanic lifted the hood on this one, the engine looked like it had been trying to send smoke signals. Turns out that the turbo was bust. Customer states, my check engine light has been on for a few weeks, but I've kept driving because the car still runs fine. The mechanic who opened the hood on this one didn't quite know where to start. Whoever had done the wiring had been pretty creative, and the air filter looked like it had been outside during Canadian winter. Customer states, my car doesn't bounce nearly as much as it used to. I think the suspension is actually getting better. Customer states, my buddy welded some stuff up underneath and it rides a little stiff now. Can you just throw some new shocks on it before Friday, cause I'm leaving town to go visit some family. This car came in with a bit of an oil pressure problem after the mechanic noticed something a little more interesting than just low oil on the dipstick. Customer states, my car's been running a little warm lately, but I think it's just the weather. And this customer came in saying that a tire place had put a patch on it last week and said that it should be good for at least another year or two. And sometimes the brake rotors just need a little encouragement to come off. The mechanic found the wheels on this SUV looking like this. Turns out the wheels had been drilled out to fit a car they were never really meant for, and the customer had driven it like that for quite some time. Customer states, I've driven this car for years and she's always been a dream. Shifting is as smooth as butter every single gear. Well, almost every single gear. The owner of this 2021 Volkswagen T-Roc had just picked it up off the lot the day before and was on his way to show it off to his friends when the car just stopped going anywhere. The mechanic opened it up and found the clutch looking a bit tired. And when getting in and out of your truck is a bit of a commitment, you find solutions. This customer had installed coil spring clamps on all 4 springs, all by themselves. The mechanic found clamps on all 4 corners, each one worse than the last. Customer states, my Fiat won't turn anymore, it just kinda goes wherever it wants to. The owner of this jet ski was pretty sure it was just a battery issue and that he'd be back out on the water by the afternoon. The mechanic reached inside and found the entire engine sitting in water. This engine did not survive whatever was asked of it, and one of the pistons had even decided it no longer wanted to be part of the team. This mechanic had this car in for a brake concern and found the brake caliper was not properly secured, which caused the wheel to lock up as soon as the customer started driving. Customer came in saying that they had their buddy help them swap the rotors last weekend, but now they've got a rattle. And this mechanic drained the oil on a nearly brand new car and found it looking more like iced coffee than motor oil. And this customer came in saying that they did some suspension work on it, but that it now felt worse than before. When the mechanic grabbed the wheel and gave it a rock, the CV axle was moving along with it. The owner of this car came in saying her tires were basically fine and she just needed a rotation. The inside of every tire looked like a bubble wrap factory had moved in. Customer states, my car's been making a little squealing sound for a while now, but I think it just needs some WD-40. Customer states, car has been feeling a little more lively than usual lately, but I figured that's normal as it gets older, right? The mechanic who popped the hood on this customer's car had a pretty interesting morning. Whoever had done the oil change had been very generous with oil, and the neighbors, well, they apparently knew about it before the owner did. And this plow truck had some wiring work done at some point. The kind of work that makes you wonder how it's still starting every morning. The owner of this Mercedes had apparently been driving on a tire that had started coming apart at the seams for a while. One of the loose threads had wrapped itself around the suspension and decided to stay there. This car came in on a tow truck after the owner had been on his way to a job interview when the front end suddenly dropped. The upper control arm had snapped clean in half and the car was only 4 years old. This car rolled in because it had a starting problem. The mechanic opened the hood and found a wiring situation that looked like someone had tried to rebuild the space shuttle from memory. Turns out, the whole thing came down to a clogged up throttle body. And this customer had fixed an oil leak on their engine block all by themselves using some JB weld, but it was still leaking. Customer states, "I think I might have a small oil leak. Can you check it out?" This Toyota Tacoma came in after the owner's son had done some maintenance on it. The engine dipstick was almost covered all the way to the handle with oil, but the transmission pan on the other hand had nothing in it. The owner of this car came in saying that he's got a wobbly steering wheel at highway speeds, but also said that if he just drives a little slower, it goes away. The owner of this car came in saying the gear shift had started feeling really stiff and that it was getting harder to get into gear every day. Turns out, the center console had been working extra as a piggy bank. This car came in for a new serpentine belt when the mechanic popped the hood and found the alternator just hanging out. Customer states, "Car's been running hot lately and the AC stopped working, probably just needs a recharge. Also, there might be a small crack in the radiator somewhere. Can you take a look?" Customer states, "I only hear the clunking when I'm going over bumps. Is that normal?" The owner of this vehicle came in saying they had just installed some new suspension parts, but that the handling had somehow gotten worse afterwards. I wonder why. Customer states, "I've got a couple of wires that I need replaced. Can you get it done before lunch?" The owner of this Ford F-250 had been on his way home from a fishing trip with his friends when something underneath the truck let go. He didn't think much of it and just drove it the rest of the way home, but was now in because he had no brakes. The mechanic who opened the hood of this car was greeted by a pretty catastrophic engine failure that required a full engine rebuild with all new internals. Unfortunately for the customer, they had to pay everything out of pocket. Customer states, "Battery keeps dying, not sure why. I tried a few things myself, but nothing worked." Customer states, "Yeah, the dealership wouldn't touch it, but it starts every time." The owner of this Chevy Malibu came in saying the car had started feeling sluggish after he had done some work on the engine. The mechanic popped the hood and found the MF sensor sitting in there, but just facing the wrong way, which explained the problem. The owner of this car was very confident the exhaust system just needed a small repair. The mechanic found the whole exhaust looking like this. Customer states, "Got rear-ended on my way to work last week, but she drives perfectly fine. Just needs a new bumper." Once the mechanic told the customer the price quote, the customer just drove away. Customer came in saying that she backed into a garbage can at a local Walmart. Once the mechanic had the car on the lift, he found the front suspension looking like this. Bent control arms, twisted sway bar, tie rod ends completely knocked out of shape, and parts of the wheel being pretty bent. And this car came in with a really decent oil leak after the customer's father-in-law had done some work on the engine the weekend before. The owner of this car came in saying they had a dunking sound when going over bumps and that they had no idea what could be causing it. The mechanic got underneath, grabbed a hammer and chisel and started chipping away at what turned out to be a truckload of dried concrete packed into the undercarriage. The owner of this truck came in saying that he's been off-roading with his son for the weekend and heard a loud noise on the way back. The transfer case had blown itself open and was letting it all hang out. The owner of this Mazda CX-5 came in saying their engine had developed a little tick and wanted it looked at. The mechanic pulled the oil filter and cut it open and found it full of the fun kind of glitter that an engine makes right before it stops working. The owner of this car had apparently decided to do his own transmission service at home to impress his father-in-law with his mechanical skills. When the mechanic had a look at the pan, the magnets were absolutely covered in metal particles. When the mechanic pulled the oil filter on this one, it came out deformed, sludgy, and bent, like it had been having a rough time for a very long time. Customer states, "She's been sitting in the yard for a while, but the engine runs great, just needs the brakes looked at before we put her back in service." The mechanic working on this first generation Mustang had been inspecting the suspension, and when he touched the upper ball joint, the whole wheel assembly decided it was time for retirement. This mechanic had found the source of this customer's oil leak pretty quickly, almost immediately actually. Customer states, there's a tiny vibration at highway speeds, but I think it just needs new tires. This car had been sitting in the garage for a few months while the owner was away visiting family. When the mechanic finally pulled the oil pan, what came out looked less like oil and more like something you'd find at the bottom of a swamp. This car came in with a cat anti-theft sticker on the side, but when the mechanic lifted it, he found the catalytic converter was gone anyway. I guess stickers are not that scary after all. The mechanic pulled a U-joint on this one and set it on the ground and found that it was happy to move in just about every direction a U-joint is not supposed to move in. The owner of this car had a front row seat to something he definitely wasn't expecting in his own driveway after he had just finished doing some suspension work on it himself. The owner of this car came in saying, yeah, there's a little steam coming from under the hood, but I think it's just condensation. This customer came in saying the ride had been feeling a little rougher than usual lately and wanted the suspension checked out. The mechanic got underneath it and found the frame looking like this. And this customer had recently done an oil change at a quick lube shop, but now complained about a loud sound when driving, especially at higher speeds. The other shop had apparently left a little souvenir for the customer. Customer states, I've been hearing a little knocking sound from the front for a few weeks now, but only when I go over bumps. Is that normal? This customer's Honda Odyssey rolled in because it had some drivetrain problems. The owner had recently been to another shop and was told that he did not need to fix anything, so he had kept driving until he heard a loud crunk sound. The owner of this truck had been running a few errands when he noticed the temperature gauge climbing a little higher than normal. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, the ground underneath the truck had turned itself into a small lake. And this customer came in saying they have a weird scent coming from the vents. The mechanic inspected the cabin air filter and found that some new tenants had moved in and gotten very comfortable. The owner of this car had been on his way to visit some family a couple states over when he noticed the car running a bit hot but figured it was probably nothing. Actually, it was not nothing. This Peugeot came in for some routine maintenance, but when the mechanic opened the AdBlue filler port in the trunk, he found nothing, just the road underneath. Customer came in saying that the car smokes a little on cold starts, but once it warms up, it's totally fine. Probably just needs some new oil, right? The owner of this truck rolled in complaining about a clunking sound from the back and couldn't for the life of him figure out where it was coming from. This customer rolled in saying that he hit a larger garden gnome on his way home from work and wanted the steering checked. The owner of this Honda Civic came in saying everything was fine and the car just needed a standard service. The mechanic kindly disagreed with the customer and told them that having a way to stop their car is a very important thing. This customer had stripped the entire interior of his car himself to chase a rattle he's been hearing on his way to work every morning. But he couldn't find it, so he came into the shop asking the mechanics for help, and it turned out to be a small metal bracket on the dashboard, barely the size of a thumb. And this car came in smelling like a casino break room and looking like the ashtray had been managing the interior for the past several years. Customer states, needed to get the alternator out of my Honda, started pulling a few things, but not entirely sure how to get back from here. The mechanic who popped the hood on this one found the battery looking like this. Turns out another shop had done a bit of a creative installation job and things had gotten a little steamy since then. Customer came in saying, the hood just doesn't want to open anymore and I have no idea why. The owner of this car came in saying he just drove the car through an automatic car wash, but that he felt the steering wheel wiggle a bit too much, so he came in to have the steering checked. This customer came in saying that he hit a bit of turbulence on the highway. And this car came in after the customer had been towing a trailer and said the clutch had started slipping badly on the highway. What came off the car was not really a clutch anymore. Customer states, car has been feeling a little sluggish lately, even though my brother patched it up and said it should be fine. The mechanic pulled the transfer case cover on this one and found the gears inside had seen much better days. Whatever service interval this thing had, it had blown past it a long time ago. Customer states, I think my car is trying to tell me something. Customer came in saying that his car has started to develop a real personality and kinda wiggles when he drives. The owner of this Chevrolet Equinox had been on her way to visit her sister when she noticed something dripping in the driveway. Someone had been at the engine with orange silicone at some point, but it was still leaking through it. When the mechanic lifted this truck and got underneath it, he noticed the suspension parts were wearing quite the rust jacket. Some of them had been doing so for long enough that the rust had become real bad. Customer states, just need some new brake pads. The calipers are fine, I just had them checked recently. The mechanic working on this truck didn't even need to look under the hood. The fuel gauge was having such a good time that it had started smacking the temperature gauge like it was a little brother. And this Jeep Compass came in with some transmission issues after the owner said it had recently gotten a new battery installed at a different shop. This customer had apparently been keeping up with all the important maintenance on their car, just maybe not the oil changes. Customer states, I've been getting some complaints about the smell, but I think it's starting to grow on people. When the mechanic went to open the trunk on this old Ford minivan, he found that someone had engineered a one-of-a-kind trunk release system by running a wire out from behind the model badge through a small hole and down to the trunk latch. And this mechanic couldn't figure out where a brake noise was coming from. He checked the front, the rear, and even under the car, but then he opened the trunk. This air filter had apparently decided to work extra as a terrarium. The mechanic who pulled this wheel found the rotor, hub, and inside of the rim completely soaked in something that very much did not belong anywhere near a brake system. Turns out, someone had gone a little overboard trying to silence an annoying sound. Customer states, steering has felt a bit stiff lately, might be the servo pump or something, but it's definitely not the tie rod. My buddy just did that one, so that's solid. Has to be something else. And this coolant reservoir was doing its best impression of a bubble bath. The owner of this car came in saying it had started to feel like it was floating over every bump, and when the mechanic had a look, the upper strut mount was just not feeling very well. Customer states, son changed his own oil for the first time. He wasn't sure how much to put in, so he just kept going until it felt right. The owner of this car had apparently been hearing a loud clunking sound for a few weeks before things took a more dramatic turn. The mechanic got underneath it and found the drive shaft looking like this. The mechanic working on this car probably needed a minute to take it all in after he opened the hood. Epoxy on the fuel lines, exposed copper wire everywhere, a pressure gauge strapped in with metal clamps and electrical tape, and a mesh net draped over the engine for reasons that remain unknown. The customer later said that their friend had helped them out, and by the looks of it, the friend had been very busy. The mechanics over at this shop had a BMW X5 roll-in on them that had apparently decided it was done being a car and wanted to be a fog machine instead. This truck had been on its way back from a camping trip when the owner noticed a new vibration at highway speeds. The differential cover came off and the main gear inside moved around freely in every direction it wasn't supposed to. The mechanic working on this car found the engine wiring looking like something had been living in there for a while. Turns out, the car had picked up a new tenant at some point and he'd been pretty busy with the wiring harness. The owner of this Jeep had been hearing a clunking sound from the rear for a few weeks and had asked their father-in-law to have a look. He said everything seemed fine, but the mechanic had a slightly different opinion. This customer came in saying their steering wheel has been shaking at highway speeds and wanted it checked out. The mechanic found the inside of the tire looking like this. The owner of this car had been hearing a pretty weird sound for a couple of weeks and finally came in to have it checked out. Turns out, whoever had done the oil change had decided to secure the skid plate in a pretty creative way. Customerstates bought it from a guy up north who said it had been sitting in a heated garage. Should be almost 100% clear of rust, he said. This customer had been on his way to pick up his son from a weekend hockey tournament when he noticed the temperature rising. The coolant reservoir came out covered in blue crystals, like something that shouldn't have been in there had been in there for quite a long time. And this car came in with what looked like a fairly straightforward oil filter swap until the mechanic cranked it and fluid started pouring out from both sides of the filter. Customerstates, hit a speed bump going a little faster than I probably should have, and now there's a knocking sound. Can you check it out? The mechanic popped the hood on this one and found a brake fluid reservoir looking like it had been topped up by someone who grabs whichever bottle is closest. This customer had apparently been holding off on new brake rotors for a while. The mechanic pulled a wheel and found a rotor that had worn itself all the way down to the ribbing underneath. Customerstates, did the rear brakes myself last weekend and used whatever I had in the garage. I've done it before, so should be totally fine. The owner of this car had been on his way to a job interview when the temperature light came on. He had the cooling system topped up the week before by his roommate, but it looks like he must have forgotten something. This is how you know a customer has been to a shop that should not be allowed to be in business. Customerstates, my BMW has started blowing smoke rings out the back. Very artistic and all, but I'm not sure it's supposed to do that. The mechanics were doing an oil change on this car and found the front spoiler held on by what looked like every plastic clip the owner could find at the hardware store. And a sticker just to let you know he means business. This customer came in and wanted to trade in his Volkswagen for a new one. But once the mechanic lifted the hood, he found the radiator, engine fan, and pretty much everything behind the grille looking like a total mess. But the outside of the car looked pretty untouched. Once the dealership told the customer that his car was worth pennies on the dollar, he got upset, told them to shove it, and drove away. The owner of this car came in saying his neighbor had recently helped with some suspension work, but now the ride felt a little rough. The front strut towers had split at the corners, and the customer's neighbor had gone at the cracks with some JB weld. This Kia EV6 rolled in after the owner said she hit a speed bump on her way out of the parking garage, and now the front end was making a sound she'd never heard before. The mechanic opened the hood and found the strut mount looking like this. The owner of this car had called up a buddy to come give them a jump, and it seemed like everything was going fine. Customerstates, she's been in the family since new, kept her garage her whole life, just needs a couple things sorted and she's good for another 100,000. The mechanic who pulled this one into the shop found a turbo setup underneath the car that could only be described as a one-of-a-kind piece of art. The owner of this BMW came in complaining about it feeling really sluggish. Turns out the turbo had one foot in this life and another foot in the afterlife. This customer rolled in saying their buddy had repaired their broken steering a few weeks ago, but it still didn't work as it should. The mechanic found this beautiful silicone, tie wraps, and electrical tape creation underneath the car. And this car came in with a pretty loud clunking noise from the drivetrain, and when the mechanic cracked open the transfer case, it had apparently been making its very own mechanical Caesar salad in there, and the only thing missing was the dressing. This vehicle was brought in because of a loud klunka-dunka sound from the rear, and when the mechanic got under it, he found that both lower control arm mounts had completely rusted away from the frame. Customerstates heard a noise from the engine and then it went away. I kept driving for a bit to see if it would sort itself out, but about 10 minutes later the car shut off on me. The mechanic who got underneath this one found that the transfer case had cracked clean through and pulled itself off its own mounts, with the drive shaft just floating around with nowhere to go. And this car rolled in with a handful of different problems, as the customer's usual mechanic had gone bananas during the yearly maintenance and mixed up pretty much everything you shouldn't mix up when working on a car. Customer states, "My Honda has been smoking a little from the engine bay, but I think it's just a valve cover gasket." The owner of this Lexus had come in absolutely certain the car had a wireless charger in the center console. He'd been placing his phone on the armrest for 3 years waiting for it to charge. The mechanic working on this car headed in for a tire inspection and found a large section of the contact surface had been patched with gray silicone. The owner of this truck apparently decided that stock ride height just wasn't gonna cut it anymore. And this customer came in saying the clutch felt a little loose, but was pretty sure it just needed adjusting. The mechanic pressed the pedal and then opened the brake fluid tank only to find it full of surprises. This customer had been on her way to pick up a friend from the train station when the brake pedal went strange on her. The rotor had worn down far enough that one of the pads had slipped out entirely and was grinding into the inside of the rim, and the whole wheel was covered in brake fluid. This mechanic was just doing an oil change on this customer's car, and this is what was in the oil pan. I wouldn't call this an oil change, but rather more of an archaeological dig. This engine had made a fairly final decision at some point. The bottom of the block had completely let go, the connecting rods were spinning freely, and the oil pan on the floor underneath was collecting the evidence. Why have only one brake pad in each slot when you can have two? The owner of this car came in saying the handling felt a little loose after their son had borrowed it for a few days. Turns out the lower ball joint wanted to go on a lifelong vacation to the scrapyard. And this tie rod was being held in place with enough rope and tie wraps to secure a small boat. The mechanic who worked on this customer's truck was told it ran fine, but just a little loud. What he found was a crack in the engine block the size of a small country, and when he fired it up to show the customer, they got their own fire show. Customer came in saying that their window regulator stopped working and there's a rattling sound from the door. The owner of this car said that she went back to the dealership where she bought her car to have them replace the wipers because she just couldn't figure it out herself. But the dealership somehow still managed to get it wrong. This car came in with an oil leak that the owner couldn't trace. The mechanic opened the hood and found the oil cap just dancing on top of the fill hole. The owner of this car came in complaining about her steering feeling kinda strange after she had picked up a fluffy pink steering wheel cover to fix it. But it didn't do much. And this one came in with a coolant system that had been entirely replumbed in white PVC piping. The mechanic unscrewed the oil cap on this Honda engine and found that the camshafts had a unique DIY protection system. The mechanic sat down in this Jeep Cherokee expecting a standard electrical diagnosis. He found wiring on the floor, wiring under the dash, wiring across the glove box, and an engine bay that looked like the previous owner had been mid-project for about 4 years. This customer had been complaining about their car overheating for a few months, but kept getting told the coolant was fine. When the mechanic finally pulled the radiator, he found the fins in a condition that made it look more like a musical instrument than a car part. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and until next time.